Welcome to the Friendly Moms Club podcast with Jen and Karlee. We're the new mom friends you didn't know you needed.
We are creating a safe space to bring moms together, lighten the heaviness, and find joy in the everyday moments. Together, we will share our own experiences of being new moms while navigating the topics we wish more people talked about.
Join us every Monday to hear us skip the small talk and dive right into the uncomfortable. Happy Mom Day, everybody. It's Karlee here. I'm flying solo today. Jen is just finishing off her little mini maternity leave from the podcast. So she's actually joining us again next week, which is going to be great. Going to be back with someone really fun next week. So make sure you tune into that. Before we start about today's episode, I just want to add in a quick little trigger warning because in today's episode, we do discuss birth injury and birth trauma. So if that's not a conversation that is going to serve you, or maybe is going to make you spiral or just affect your mental health in any way, please skip out on today and join us for next episode. So today we have a really interesting conversation with an attorney named Gina Mundy. She has over 20 years specializing in childbirth cases. So she recently wrote a book that compiles all of her professional experience over the last 20 years being an attorney for childbirth cases. And it's called A Parent's Guide to Safer Childbirth, Expecting the Best, Using Knowledge of Power to Help You Deliver a Healthy Baby. So today we're talking about childbirth in like a little bit of a different approach. So this episode is not to be like a fear-mongering conversation about the dangers of birth, but instead it's just a discussion on the importance of prenatal education and knowing and having an understanding of what you would do if you were faced with an important decision before you're actually faced with it. My main takeaway from my conversation with Gina is the importance of prenatal education and actually understanding what could happen in birth. We're not saying it's going to happen. Also tune in to hear kind of what the common denominator that is actually missing in all of her childbirth cases. It's a specific role that somebody plays on a birth team. And she says this person is helping moms have healthy babies. So tune in for that. I also want to point out that we do discuss mostly hospital births today. That seems to be just what Gina was working with. Well, actually, now that I say that, maybe that's saying something about home births, and they're actually a lot safer than people assume. That's a whole nother conversation for another day. So if that's something that you would be interested in, learning about home births, let us know. Jen and I have met some really lovely mamas in the birth community that work as doulas and would love to share some of their information about home births and maybe talk about some of the myths and misconceptions about them, because everybody assumes that birth in the hospital is automatically safer. And for some people, it can be. But for low risk, healthy pregnancies, home births are actually a wonderful option. So anyways, that's a complete tangent that we're not going to talk about today. Anyways, I hope you enjoy today's episode. And yeah, happy Mom Day. Good morning. Happy Mom Day, everybody. We have a very special guest on today. We have Gina Mundy. So welcome to the podcast, Gina.
Karlee, thank you for having me. Based upon our pre-show conversation, I am super excited for our talk today.
I'm very excited. We were talking a little bit about my journey and my career change from labor and delivery into public health. And Gina and her area of expertise just fit so nicely into this. So I want you to start us off, Gina. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, absolutely. So I have been an attorney for 21 years. I got my first case February 2003. And it was a case involving childbirth. And actually, when I was hired into my firm, I was hired in just to do childbirth cases. And the scary part about that is that when I was hired in, there was a team of over 20 of us. And that's basically all we did. And let me explain to you, more like your audience, and I'm sure you understand being in the field, but a childbirth case involves the birth of a baby. When something goes wrong, baby is not born healthy. And when I say baby's not born healthy, I'm talking about permanently not healthy. Some babies pass away during childbirth. Some moms then also pass away during childbirth. Those turn into lawsuits. I am one of the attorneys involved in the lawsuit. So my job is to come in, figure out what happened, what went wrong, why, more importantly, what should have been done so baby could have been born healthy or mom around to raise her baby. Those questions have taken me across the United States many times, in almost every state, meeting with delivery teams, hashing out every aspect of labor and delivery. So yeah, I've seen a lot in the last about 21 years ago next month.
How did you get yourself into this? Like, it's such an interesting niche of law and then also like intersecting with healthcare. So how did you get into working in like the labor and delivery side of things?
I wish I had a better story. I needed a first job after law school. It was a large
Mm-hmm.
firm. The department was hiring. I applied. I got the job thinking eventually I would go over into real estate or business, which was initially what I wanted to specialize in. But then once I got my first case and I realized, these things that can go wrong in labor and delivery. I mean, nobody teaches you about this area in law school, high school, college. I've never heard of baby cases, childbirth cases, until I got my first job. Not only that, I had just gotten married, having a baby was on my radar. So I found it
Mm-hmm.
very interesting. And obviously, at that point, with knowing I was going to have a baby in the next couple of years, I'm like, okay, what do I need to know as a soon to be mom to make sure that I'm not one of these cases in the future?
For sure. And I think with the birthing world is a lot of people, they're not like ignorant to it, but they're unaware of what actually happens until either they go through it or somebody very close to them goes through it. But also close, because people don't talk about birth. People don't talk about, we talk about this on our podcast. People don't talk about birth. They don't talk about the hard parts of pregnancy. They don't talk about, breastfeeding in public. A lot of the times people kind of keep it hush hush. And then if things don't go the way that was planned, then they like suffer in silence because there's a big spectrum of things that can happen. Like you highlighted, the worst case scenario, permanent injuries or death to mom or baby. Like that is the most devastating. But then there's also this area in between and probably so many cases that don't actually make it to you on your desk. There's moms with birth trauma. But I think the main thing for me working in the birthing space that was so difficult is that, and what was just another day at work for me is somebody's birth story that they take with them forever. And maybe it wasn't the most traumatic, devastating thing, but maybe it just didn't go as planned. And they're leaving it kind of feeling yucky, feeling like they didn't really get a say, feeling like they didn't really know what was happening. And it was really scary for them. And that can still be very traumatic for people. So this brings me to your book, because your book, when I saw the title, I was like, this is what we need, because I love childbirth education and prep, but this has a unique perspective because you work as a lawyer for childbirth cases. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, and then we're going to get into talking about birth prep and education.
Great. So I will start, and I should have mentioned this in my intro. I am a mom of three. I have two daughters. One's 19, one's 15, and I have a 9-year-old son. So it started, the idea, after we had a near family tragic event involving a birth of a baby.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I kind of stopped me in my tracks, and I'm like, wait a minute, what if I'm not around for the birth of my grandkids? Because I can tell you how I prepare my kids for childbirth will be completely different than how a family would traditionally prepare for childbirth. And then I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to start writing some of these things down that I know. What's common in my cases? What are reoccurring issues that everybody must know? And what if my kids face this during their, birth of their baby? So that's kind of where it all started. But then once I started writing everything down and I switched from attorney to author, I realized pretty quick this is information that all expecting parents need to know in order to avoid the mistakes and complications that I have seen for the last 21 years. Because I'll tell you, it is so devastating in these cases. Families are one decision away or minutes from a healthy baby. So making those good decisions, understanding childbirth, I cannot emphasize it enough, as an attorney in child, that specializes in childbirth cases. So yeah, it started with family, and then it turned into something bigger. 14 months later, thousands of hours. The book was finally then published in June 2023. The book is called A Parent's Guide to a Safer Childbirth, Expecting the Best, Using the Power of Knowledge to Help You Deliver a Healthy Baby. So basically, The introduction is actually my niece's story. That was like our near family tragic event. The baby is
Wow.
okay. So I know it's a little alarming not alarming, but you're just
Yeah,
like, I started off that introduction, at that point kind of where everything changed. But
for
we were
sure.
expecting a phone call that my niece was having, had her baby, and I had her baby. It was
Yeah.
my sister on the other line, her mom screaming bloody murder, the baby crashed,
Oh my
and that was
goodness.
kind of the
That's so
moment where
scary.
this whole book thing kind of.
I just want to say real quick before you keep going, everybody thinks that it's not going to happen to them or their family, but it can.
So I love it. You're so smart. So that's lesson one,
Mhm.
Karlee, literally
Yeah.
in my book. And what I say and how I start that lesson off is, in these cases, the families have the mindset we are all guilty of. Bad
Mhm.
things only happen to other people. But when you have that
Mhm.
mindset, it leaves you in a very vulnerable state of mind. And as an attorney specializing in childbirth cases, I would not recommend that on one of the biggest days of your life. If you're anything
Mhm.
like me, since you started playing with babies when you were just a kid, you've been dreaming of this day. Prepare for childbirth. Lesson number one, Karlee hit it on the nose. Love it. So, chapter one, I go over the lessons from the baby cases, lessons from the medical experts, the families, the delivery teams. As a lesson, this is what we can learn to prevent the future mistakes. Each lesson one, like we just talked about, getting ready for childbirth, not being in that mindset that's going to leave you in a vulnerable state of mind, getting ready. So, that lesson then, and all of the lessons, then are a subsequent chapter. So, lesson one, learning about labor and delivery, will take you then to chapter two. And those are the basics to know about labor and delivery. These are the basics that I often rely upon to figure out, was the care provided to mom and baby good care or bad care? So, these are not typical things that you're going to learn in a normal pregnancy book. So I can tell you that
Mhm.
I get a lot of comments on my reviews on Amazon, and they're like, "Oh, we didn't realize this. We didn't realize this." Okay, this is really important stuff. This is what I would tell my kids. This is what I would teach my kids about the basics of labor and delivery to help you make good decisions so your baby can come into this world healthy. And keep in mind, my book is not about what can go wrong. It's about making sure that it goes right.
A lot of people go into childbirth thinking that, well, from my perspective, just people that I've met in my work, is that they think the worst case scenario is that they have to have a C-section. And in my head, I'm like, that is absolutely not the worst case. That is, in some cases, just how it's going to happen. And it's not the worst case scenario. And I think it's interesting that you say that it's that one decision. And healthcare providers, we do try to give patients options, right? Like, it's their birth. We want them to be involved in the decision making. I find sometimes that patients are just so set on one thing they want out of their birth, and people are tied to these outcomes. But what they
Mhm.
don't realize, that in the in between, there's all of these things that can happen, and ways that you do need to prepare for birth is, if I'm given these options, what would I choose and why? Like, would I be choosing the forceps there because that's the fastest way to get baby out? Or am I choosing a C-section because it's going to save my vagina? Like, those are
Mhm.
the things that people don't think about. Patients don't, it's so hard for them to have an informed decision when they have their rose colored glasses on, when they're just looking at the outcome that they want. So they want a vaginal delivery. They're so set on it, they'll do anything to get that. They don't want any perineal trauma. Like, these are all just different examples. So they'll do anything to avoid significant perineal trauma. But sometimes I want to shake them. Do you know what I'm trying to say? That people are so set on things they want, but they don't know why they want them, or they want it for the wrong reason.
Those are the families in my cases. They sometimes do have their set ways. They don't understand
Yeah.
why. But sometimes, as humans, once you commit to a decision,
Yeah.
then human nature is actually to stick by that. So, like, for instance, in my book, I recommend one of the lessons, preparing a labor and delivery plan. But
Mm-hmm.
I set right there, listen, labor and delivery is most likely not going to go as planned. Not only that, I have a different spin on it. It's the act of getting ready, marinating
Mm-hmm.
in these decisions. And if I have to make a decision like this, which one am I going to choose? I mean, in the end of the book, I'm like, these are things to think about. And not only that, to go over with your doctor during, your prenatal period. In my book, I don't say walk in, give the big plan to your labor and delivery team. It's more of preparing it in the comfort of your home just to get you ready to make those decisions so you can pivot if you need to. And again, have that streamlined communication with your labor and delivery team. I've had so many nurses read my book and their reaction is the same. If patients knew and understood what was in your book, my job would be so much easier because they would understand what I'm saying the first time. And I don't have to explain everything in detail, swallow up what's important. Again, when you go into labor and delivery, you enter a different state of mind. It's the only time in life where being in a bunch of pain is okay. So it's important that you do this in the comfort of your home. Do it over a couple of months. Listen to amazing podcasts like Karlee's. Read my book. Call a friend. Do what you got to do. So whatever happens during labor and delivery, you can pivot because, again, different state of mind. You're focusing on mentally and physically delivering your baby. So again, very important.
That is such important information because I find that when people are in labor or they just had a baby, when you're in that bubble, there is no informed decision making if you haven't thought about it before. Because when you're in that moment, like you can't think clearly. So you need to actually know what you would want to do in those different scenarios. And that's something, like you said, you have to spend the months before thinking about. When people ask me about tips for labor, like friends and family, I often say, if you are presented with outcomes that were not like that you initially did not want. So say you get to a point and they say you either need to get Pitocin or because you're not progressing, or you need to go for a C-section. You've been pushing for 2 hours and baby's not happy and they offer a forceps or a C-section. Those are the things that you need to know about. You don't need to know about whether or not you want baby skin to skin after, whether you want the lights low. Yes, those preferences are important because that also plays a role in like how your birth goes. But those things, like those don't need to be at the top of the list on your birth plan because no nurse has ever been like, absolutely not, you can't play some beautiful soft music. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, I know exactly what you're saying. And
yeah.
The reason my book is completely different than any other pregnancy book. Listen, my book's not going to be skin to skin or anything like that. If you want to do that, that's great. Read another pregnancy book. Mine are the critical decisions that you may have to make that could make a difference on whether you have a healthy baby or not. And by the way, I just have to say, moms shouldn't even make decisions in labor and delivery because of the difference, the change in their mindset and the bubble that they're in. So I had a doctor testify to the same exact thing, and I included his testimony in my book that most decisions really need to be made before mom gets into the labor and delivery bubble. And you have a baby in your belly. You have to be in a bubble to relax and get your baby delivered. It's completely normal to be in that bubble. It's just make sure you're ready cognitively to make those, quick decisions.
Those decisions. And make sure your birth team knows, your partner, whoever's on your birth team, it can be written down. I think that's so important that you say that they need to be made before, because people spend months decorating their nursery. People spend months crafting like the perfect registry list and buying all of the baby gear and getting it all set up. And then people say, oh, I can't, buy this book, or I can't do this course. It's too expensive. And I just is the cheese grater to my soul. Cause I'm like, this is the most important thing for you and baby to be healthy and for you to also be a participant in your birth. And you can't do that if you're not prepared. And I don't, like we talked about, I don't mean prepared in like knowing whether or not you want to do skin to skin or what atmosphere you want in your birth. Those things are important, but those decisions you're talking about, those are life-changing decisions that how are you supposed to make that when you're in labor land?
Completely. You threw me off. You completely stole my line, by the way.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm like, everybody wants to buy the cute clothes. They want to get the nursery ready. And so actually we are so on the same page with this stuff. You also mentioned something else, by the way, going back to the nursery and enjoy all of that stuff. It's very important to get ready to make sure you never meet someone like me professionally. I did something else that was super, super important. And that is having somebody else there, husband, grandma, friend, and whoever it is. And I have a whole chapter dedicated to the baby advocate, and that's what I call
Mm-hmm.
them.
Mm-hmm. I
Basically,
love
if
that.
dad's going to be there, give him a job. So that way, if you need to switch out labor and delivery nurses, or by the way, labor and delivery nurses are like my favorite people. So,
Mm-hmm.
but just like every profession, there has been some ones that I've not been a fan of that would not be
Of
part of
course.
delivering, my grandkids. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
Mm-hmm.
You
For
guys are
sure.
bedside with these patients. You run hard. It is amazing. Anyway, husband's going to be there. Okay. Instinctively, he is going to want to protect his wife, his
Mm-hmm.
baby. He's going to want to bring him home healthy because I'm sure he worked really hard on that nursery, putting the crib together, painting the walls, and doing
Mm-hmm.
everything that you said for 9 months. If he knows what's in my book, he is going to be such a great advocate for you and baby to allow you then to focus on what you need to do in your bubble to get baby delivered. Give him something to do. And I'll tell you, if you go on my Amazon reviews, it's the dads who are leaving the reviews because they are so excited. They don't just have to sit there,
Mm-hmm.
hoping and praying for the best anymore. No, you don't have to do that anymore. You have my book. Read it.
They can be like an active participant. I find dads
That's
sometimes so clueless in labor and delivery. Sometimes they don't understand the process of labor, but then also they don't really understand what's happening to their body. And then even worse, they don't know how to help their partner. And I love that you say they can be the advocate because you know what? Maybe they're not the one birthing the baby, but it is their baby as well. And it also
Mhm.
is their birth story that like this is a wonderful way for them to be a part of it instead of just being a watcher. Like they're not just an observer, they're actually an active team member. So I love that you say that.
Well, listen, as a mom, I had 3 kids. I'm a C-section mom, but let me tell you,
Mm-hmm.
if my husband's on it or he was on it and I
Mm-hmm.
would be so in love with him. Oh yeah, he has it. That's hot.
Definitely, for sure. People always think that men being involved in, like, I mean, it's 2024, men being involved in caring for a baby, caring for their partner, like men actually doing those more like, in quote, motherly things for their partner. That's not wimpy. That's actually one of like the sexiest things a partner can do. And I think that's a big shift happening now is that men can be part of either the care team for the baby, care team for the mom, whether it's in labor and delivery or after, in a way that we don't typically expect men to. My grandpa, when my grandma had her first, my dad, he didn't even, I was like, oh, was he in the delivery room? Because this was the 50s. I was curious. She's like, the delivery room? She's like, he was at work. And I was like, what do you mean he was at work? Like, it was the 50s. That's what they did. Also, they were new immigrants. They didn't have money. He had to work. But I was like, man,
Mhm.
times have changed. Times have changed. Now, talking about birth advocates, something that I really want to get into is talking about doulas because I'm going to share from my perspective as a labor and delivery nurse. When I did my training, I have never seen nurses roll their eyes more than they do at doulas. And now I want to say my perspective has 100% changed from having a baby, meeting some really wonderful doulas, and also understanding more about birth outcomes. And I now recognize how important doulas are. So I don't know if it's the same where in the States, but here at the hospital I work at, there's a lot of resistance sometimes to doulas from the like nursing and healthcare team. And I think the reason for this is that we have this idea that they're making decisions for their patients and providing medical like advice. But now I know like that's not what they're doing. They are just speaking for the patient based on things they've already decided previously. They're not making that decision for the patient in that moment. They're just communicating what they know their patient wants. And I think for healthcare staff, we get a little like fired up sometimes when we think the doulas are giving medical advice because that's not their role. Their role is support, but the support can be communicating what medical decisions that patient wants. So I think this is a big shift that a lot of healthcare people need to make. And my goal coming back from mat leave was like, I want to change the unit culture towards doulas. Like I want to change the like perspective towards doulas on my unit. And I have to say there are some, the same way that you said, there's some like bad apples of nurses, there's bad apples of doctors. There's also some doulas where I work, where they practice outside of their scope. They do like unattended births and they deliver babies at home and they're doing vaginal exams and things that aren't within their scope. But like one of my doula friends likes to say, those aren't doulas. Those are, I don't know what you want to call them. So a doula who is practicing in their scope and their role are so valuable to the care team, because moms, when they're in labor land, they can't be either communicating or talking about their decisions that they've already made. So look at this. We got the partner on one side. We've got the doula, beautiful little care team. I don't know if I just stole your words there. Let me know what you think about that.
I love it. We are just so on the same page. I love doulas. As a childbirth attorney, I love doulas. Doulas are not in childbirth cases. I've asked my childbirth friends, they're attorneys, do you have doulas in your cases? And it's always like a aha moment. And it's like, no, we don't. So obviously, given how many cases I have worked on over the years, doulas are helping families have healthy babies. And if you look at my recommendations in the book, my pro tips, if you look at the lessons and you look at the common reoccurring issues in the cases, and if you kind of look at it all and then you look at the role of a good doula, it just makes sense. It makes sense how they are helping the families, because I think what a lot of families don't realize is that when you roll up to labor and delivery to give birth, you typically are meeting your delivery team for the very first time, except your doula. You have your doula who you've built a relationship with. Doulas are amazing at educating their patients or clients. So they educate them. A lot of them, I love this, they get dad ready. So
Yes.
they kind of all work together.
Mm-hmm.
And, they have an understanding of what mom wants, her preferences, what she's thinking, what's important to her. And then not only that, so you get to the hospital and your delivery team is running hard because it might be a busy day or busy day on the unit. You
Mm-hmm.
have your doula there. You have your doula that's your second set of eyes with your husband, making sure everything's okay. And not only that, your doula speaks the language of the delivery team. They have an understanding of everything. If the patient sometimes is given a couple different options from maybe a nurse that they didn't know who's really busy, because again, the unit's busy, so the nurse only has so much time to explain your options, you can then talk through it with your doula. So yeah, having a doula at your bedside will definitely be beneficial and help you have a healthy baby.
And I think when we look into it in terms of birth trauma as well, having somebody there who can help support you and care for you and just be the person that who's the familiar face in all of the change that is the hospital and giving birth can be so reassuring for patients. So when they have somebody like a doula who can be there to also support their emotional needs, I feel like it just completely changes their birth. And then for those pivotal moments when they need to make those decisions, one, they've read your book, so they know what they want to do. Two, they have their doula there to help advocate for them. They have their partner there to help advocate for them. And then if it's something, say, that wasn't at the top of their preferences, because that happens, now they have somebody there to also support them emotionally while they go through that. And I just think if more patients had this understanding, they had this knowledge, they had this plan, that birth would just be such a different space. And that's what we
100%.
need in the world.
100%. Well said. I don't even know if I can add to that one.
Yeah.
Clearly, I'm very on the same page.
Clearly, I'm very fired up.
But no, I do think, doulas do also, that's another great point. They do, mom can relax. That's going to shorten the duration of your labor, because if you're relaxed and you're just focusing on you and I love it, labor land, I'm actually going to steal that from you.
Yeah.
When you're relaxed during that, it is just going to be such a better experience. Baby's going to be able to have an easier time coming out. I mean, if it's stressful at all and you're in fight or flight mode or something happens, that's hard. That's hard on moms. So yeah, having that doula, staying relaxed, they definitely help to, make that happen.
For sure. And especially we touched on busy units. You know what nurses don't have time for? Getting warm blankets and the peanut ball and fresh linens. And those are things that are so important, not as much to prevent the outcomes that you talk about, but just in general for birth. And I don't know why nurses have such a resistance to doula sometimes when they're there and willing to do parts of their job, that like nursing job, that we don't have time for. So
I knew some stuff about doulas. Ever since I published the book, I have learned so much about doulas because I have kind of been on like this mission, just trying to help parents have healthy babies. And it wasn't until my book was published that I really got into the doula world. And like, I am like, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Again, I wish I would have put that all together before the book was published, because I would have had a lot more about doulas in my book.
maybe that can be part 2, because you
Literally.
have the information here, and I feel like there's such an opportunity for, like, you obviously have tips and an action plan in your book, but sometimes people need like that information, then they need to digest it, and then making that plan. So I sense a little workbook, a little something in your future.
Well, I will tell you, Karlee, my book is focused solely on childbirth.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of pregnancy things that I see also as a childbirth attorney. So there is a pregnancy book in play.
Yeah.
And then what I'm thinking is then doula would come into,
yes,
part of the pregnancy, because they do educate a lot and they get husband ready. They know what to do. They have usually amazing material for their clients. So yeah, that does not surprise me that you would hit that one on the head.
We're speaking the same language here.
I know. I love it.
Happy outcomes with birthing.
We got to go to chapter 11 of the book. Chapter 11 are the reoccurring issues, reoccurring facts. So we talked about one of them. It's probably the second one is the busy labor and delivery unit, but we just got to make sure we hit on the first one. And if you want to guess what that is
it something with Pitocin?
100%.
Yeah.
Pitocin is the number one most common fact in a childbirth case. So when something goes wrong, it's typically Pitocin is in the labor.
And I think I should say for people listening, Pitocin, oxytocin, it's the hormone, the synthetic hormone we give in labor to help make contractions stronger, more frequent, for labor to progress, your cervix to dilate, and then giving you power to push baby out. It's not always bad, as I'm sure you mentioned. Sometimes it's very important to help you get your baby out. Like sometimes it is needed. There's so many factors that go into progression of labor. And like we call them the 5 Ps. I don't know if you guys call them that, but one of the really important things is position. So like being upright, and psyche. So the mom, like maternal psyche, being relaxed. And from my perspective, patients, they don't know what to do in early labor. They don't know how to get things progressing. And so that's where the doula comes in, because they help get things going. And I find a lot of the times we have to give Pitocin because their labor slows down, because they're not equipped with the tools on how to labor and how to help things progress. And then also, a lot of patients get early epidurals too, which for us is one of the reasons we have to give Pitocin. And I just think, what if they had more people supporting them, that like a doula, like a partner, somebody who can help them get from 2 centimeters to 7 centimeters before they need epidural, or maybe they just end up not needing one. And I think of all these other factors that come into why we rely on Pitocin. Sometimes it's a very important tool, but then we also overuse it for some of the reasons that I mentioned. And then also we overuse it in healthcare for convenience. We're so impatient, and we don't trust the like actual process of labor, because everything once you go into a hospital is on a timeline. So patients want to come to the hospital. They want to be there. They're worried. They're scared. They're laboring. They don't want to be at home. Hey, if they had a doula that was with them at home, they'd probably feel a lot more safe in staying home instead of coming into the hospital, and then we muck around in their labor. So I'm just getting on a whole other tangent here about Pitocin, because and I'm sure these are all things that you've noticed in your cases.
So I wrote a chapter basically on how to have a safe Pitocin induction based upon all the research I've done, hospital protocols, what I know about the drug, cross-examinations of experts, you name it. It's been a big part of my cases for 21 years. I probably know way too much about Pitocin. So I did have a chapter in there on how to have a safe Pitocin induction, because actually it is one of the lessons. To just it's a very last lesson, but Pitocin's number one fact in a baby case. It can be safely administered. It is. I mean, I have talked ever since, halfway through my career, I've been like, Pitocin's in all my cases. And I started complaining to the doctors, the nurses, anybody who would listen. And they're like, Gina, we don't have a choice. Sometimes it's that or C-section. So we're going to use Pitocin. Here's the deal. You know, this Pitocin is a very individualized drug. How your body responds to it can be completely different than how someone else responds to it. So if you've never been given Pitocin, nobody knows how your body's going to respond to it. So that's why it's important, you know, in my book, I'm like slow and steady, hit your sweet spot.
That's such a good tip. And that's something that when they go into labor and delivery, something that can be a compromise that their care team is recommending Pitocin, and maybe they're concerned about the potential outcomes of that. And maybe it is one of those situations where it actually is like medically indicated. It could be what can help them labor and have a vaginal delivery as opposed to having to go for a C-section at that point. But maybe that's the compromise, that patients come in with this information and they say, hey, why do we have to go up by 2? Let's go up by 1. But I think we should just highlight also that we're not saying Pitocin is always bad. We're not saying that you absolutely have to avoid it. I think just knowing about it, read the Pitocin chapter.
Yeah, how to have a safe Pitocin induction, because sometimes your only other option is a C-section. So it may be, yeah, for some people it may be, you know, an option. And again, I wrote this book for my kids. So if my kids are going to have a Pitocin induction, I'm like, this is how you have a safe induction, because I know of the safe inductions. They do a lot of inductions, but this is how to have a safe one.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
Quick, just so if someone's listening to this and you're expecting a baby, you might be like, heck no, I'm not having Pitocin. I don't need to read chapter 14. Listen, things happen when you're pregnant. And it's very possible that you may go in at 38 weeks, have the baby checked. Maybe there's concerns, but you're not in labor. The delivery team or the people at the hospital are going to be like, okay, it's time to admit you. And we need to get you into labor. You have, you know, really one option for that, Pitocin, or we need to do a C-section. But it is important that, you know, you understand as an expecting parent, you could walk into a hospital or a doctor's office, and if there's concerns about the baby, you're going to be making some very important decisions quickly. So learning about Pitocin during pregnancy is absolutely huge and important on the off chance you do have to make that very, very important decision.
I think that's a really good point, that sometimes it is necessary.
You know, I do want to share one more thing.
Of course, yeah.
I do have this great chapter, how to pick the good doctor. So I have analyzed OBGYNs, the people who deliver babies, for 21 years. That is a huge part of my job. Your doctor heads your delivery team. However, your doctor is typically not at the hospital. Now, they may have a 12-hour shift or there may be special circumstances. Majority of the time, though, doctor is not at the hospital. They're called in to catch the baby. So your doctor or the other doctors in the practice that may be involved during the birth of your baby, there's some really great things that you need to know. Having a good doctor is just huge.
Do you notice a difference in your cases, between patients who had doctors or midwives as their care provider?
Most of mine are doctors. I've had some midwives. I think the midwife cases are more like they wait too long to get the doctor involved. That's your typical midwife case, because she cannot, as a midwife, perform an operative vaginal delivery, vacuum or forceps. She can't perform a C-section and whatnot. Yeah. So sometimes it's important to get doctors, you know, involved. Yeah. Most of my cases are OBGYNs.
But maybe that's saying something too between care providers. I think that you shared so much information. Just looking back at our conversation, I have so many wonderful takeaways here on how our listeners can go forward in birth, and starting with reading your book, learning about birth from a different perspective. Yes, you need to learn about birth and what happens in your body, but also learning about the decisions you might need to make, figuring out who to have on your care team. These are all such important things that are not talked about enough. So thank you for sharing those. Going into this podcast, this wasn't supposed to be like, oh my God, you have to go read Gina's book. But now that is what I'm screaming. I know the information in it is going to help people.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Karlee. I appreciate that. I mean, I wrote it for one reason, and that's to help parents have a healthy baby. So thank you.
That's wonderful. So tell people where they can find you.
GinaMundy.com. It will always have the updated information on me, where you can find my book, what's going on. I do have a blog and some other stuff on there for expecting
Perfect.
parents. It's GinaMundy.
Yep.
And probably right now the best place to buy my book is Amazon.
Yep.
And if you just put Gina Mundy in the search bar, or if you go to my website, it'll take you to a link to the book. But again, the book is called A Parent's Guide to a Safer Childbirth. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Gina Mundy.
Perfect. I will make sure all of that is down in the description, and you'll be seeing Gina's lovely face on our Instagram as well while we share some of these podcast clips. So anyways, thank you so much for today. I think this was a wonderful chat that's really going to help people with their own birth experience.
Thank you for having me, Karlee. I truly enjoyed today's conversation.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Just what we needed.